For centuries, the vampire believed the sun was his enemy, a fire that would one day erase him if he ever grew careless. He built his eternity around avoiding it. Cities rose and fell in darkness, while he survived by memory, alone, untouched, unchanged, and unchallenged by time. Until the day the sunset waited for him. When an ancient warning surfaces, one that speaks not of death, but of choice, the vampire is forced to confront something far more terrifying than extinction, the possibility that his immortality is ending on his own terms. As the sun begins to behave strangely, lingering longer on the horizon, casting shadows that feel like memories rather than light, he realizes that this sunset is different. It is not coming for his body, it is coming for his past. Haunted by the lives he has outlived and the love he abandoned centuries ago, the vampire journeys through a world that no longer believes in monsters. Along the way, he encounters a mortal woman who sees through his myth and into the man he once was. Her presence reawakens something he buried long ago, humanity, and with it, a truth he cannot escape. Some curses are sustained not by magic, but by fear. As dusk draws closer, old enemies resurface, secrets unravel, and the vampire learns that his survival has always come at a cost paid by others. The approaching sunset is not a weapon, but a mirror, reflecting every choice he made to remain alive while others faded into history. In the final hours before nightfall, the vampire must decide whether eternity is worth the loneliness it demands, or if the courage to let go is the final act of freedom. The sunset waits patiently, neither cruel nor kind, offering no guarantees, only an ending that must be chosen. This is not a story about how a vampire dies. It is the story of how one finally learns how to live, and what he is willing to surrender when the last light touches the sky. Chapter 1. The city had forgotten how to fear the dark. Neon signs bled color into the streets, streetlights hummed like tired sentinels, and the night moved with the confidence of something conquered long ago. People walked freely after sunset now. They laughed. They argued. They checked their phones and hurried home, unaware that for centuries, this hour had belonged to creatures like him. Edrin stood at the edge of a rooftop, coat unmoving in the still air, watching the sun hesitate. It should have been gone by now. The horizon burned in slow amber and bruised crimson, the light clinging stubbornly to the skyline as if the sky itself had forgotten how to let go. Edrin narrowed his eyes, not in fear, but in recognition. Time did not behave strangely without reason. He had lived long enough to know that when the world faltered, it was never accidental. For over 400 years, he had never watched the sun this closely. He had learned early that survival meant discipline. Never linger, never stare, never let beauty distract you from consequence. Sunsets were luxuries for mortals, people who believed tomorrow was guaranteed. For him, dusk had always been a deadline. Until tonight. The warmth did not burn. That alone unsettled him. He raised his gloved hand, letting the dying light touch his skin. There was no pain, no smoke, only a faint pressure, like memory pressing against flesh. The kind of sensation one feels when standing in a place they once loved and abandoned. Edrin lowered his hand slowly. "This isn't right," he murmured, though there was no one to hear him. Below him, the city moved on, ignorant. Somewhere a siren wailed. Somewhere a couple argued over nothing that would matter in a year. Somewhere a child laughed, sharp and bright, the sound cutting through him more cruelly than any blade. He turned away from the edge and retreated into shadow, not because the light threatened him, but because habit still held power. The room behind him was sparse. Concrete walls, a single chair, no mirrors. He had learned to live without reminders. Objects made attachment too easy, and attachment, over time, became grief. Edrin sat, closing his eyes. Memories came uninvited now. They always did when the sun behaved like this. He remembered another evening, centuries ago, when the light had looked just as defiant. Back then, the city had been smaller, dirt roads instead of asphalt, torches instead of electricity. He had been younger, still learning the rules of what he had become, still foolish enough to believe eternity could be shaped into something gentle. That was the night he learned otherwise. His eyes opened. The present pressed back in, heavier than before. Something was changing. He felt it not in his body, which had long since stopped offering reliable warnings, but in the quiet places inside him, the spaces where hunger and instinct usually drowned out thought. Tonight, those instincts were silent, listening, waiting. Edrin rose and moved to the window. The sunset still lingered, as though frozen mid-breath. He had outlived prophecies before, watched religions rise, fracture, and die, heard 1,000 predictions of his end, each spoken with certainty, each proven wrong by time. He did not believe easily in warnings anymore. And yet, 3 nights ago, an oracle had died in his arms. He had not sought her. He had avoided seers for decades. They complicated things. But she had found him anyway, blind eyes fixed on his face, as if she could see through centuries. "You will see the sun," she had whispered, blood dark at the corner of her mouth, not as an enemy, not as a judge, as a question. He had laughed then, a soft, bitter sound. "What question?" he had asked, but she had already gone still. Edrin had buried her before dawn, out of respect rather than guilt. He told himself that prophecies were stories people told themselves to make death feel organized. Now, watching the sun refuse to fall, he wondered if he had been lying. The hunger stirred suddenly, sharp and unwelcome. It always came when his thoughts grew too close to the past. He pushed it down. Feeding tonight would only blur his mind, and clarity felt important, though he did not yet know why. A movement in the street below caught his attention. A woman stood beneath a street lamp that had not yet turned on, her face tilted upward, eyes fixed on the sky. She wasn't shielding her eyes. She wasn't in a hurry. She simply stood there, watching the sunset with the same stillness he felt inside his chest. Something about her posture unsettled him. Mortals rarely noticed the sky anymore. He felt the pull before he understood it. Edrin did not leave the building immediately. He told himself he was curious, nothing more. Curiosity had always been safer than admitting desire. Still, minutes later, he was descending the stairwell, shadows clinging to him like old allies. By the time he stepped onto the street, the woman had not moved. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said without turning around. His steps slowed. "You're staring at a vampire," he replied coolly. "That's usually not how these encounters begin." She smiled, finally facing him. "I don't believe in vampires," she said, "but I do believe in things that have lived too long." Her eyes met his, and for the first time in decades, Edrin felt seen. Above them, the sun finally dipped lower, the light thinning, stretching, reluctant. For reasons he did not yet understand, Edrin knew this moment mattered. The night had not begun yet, and the sunset was still watching him. Chapter 2. They stood facing each other as the sky continued its slow surrender, neither of them speaking for several breaths too long. Edrin was the first to look away. He had learned, over centuries, that eye contact was an invitation. Fear, curiosity, desire, they all lived in the pause between two gazes. He had survived by breaking that pause before it turned dangerous. "You should go home," he said at last. "Night comes quickly, even when it pretends otherwise." The woman glanced at the horizon, then back at him. "So does loneliness." The word struck harder than any insult. Edrin stiffened. "You mistake me for someone else." "No," she replied calmly. "I think I've finally found the right person." She stepped closer, just enough that he could hear her breathing. Mortals were loud that way. Their bodies insisted on reminding the world that they were alive. "Why were you watching the sunset like it was about to betray you?" she asked. Edrin laughed quietly. It surprised him. "Because it always does." She studied him, unafraid, as if weighing something unseen. You talk like someone who's already lost. I've lost more than you could imagine. That's usually true of everyone, she said. The difference is whether they carry it or bury it. He turned sharply. What do you want? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he sensed something genuine. Not hunger, not ambition, something softer. My name is Leora, she said. I'm a historian, or I was, before universities decided memory mattered less than funding. She gestured vaguely toward the city. I study things people don't like to remember. Edrin raised an eyebrow. And that led you to strangers on rooftops? She smiled faintly. It led me to you. The streetlights flickered on around them, one by one, as if the city itself had finally accepted that daylight was over. Yet the sky still glowed faintly, stubborn in its aftercolor. You shouldn't be here, Edrin said again, more softly this time. Neither should you, Leora replied. Yet here we are. He considered leaving. Vanishing into shadow would take less than a heartbeat. But something held him in place, something heavier than fear. The same sensation he had felt when the sun touched his skin without burning. Walk with me, she said suddenly. Just for a few minutes. If you decide I'm wrong about you, I'll disappear from your life forever. Edrin studied her face. He saw no deception there, no glamour, just resolve, and something like hope. He nodded once. They walked without destination, the city opening around them in quiet stretches of pavement and dim storefronts. Leora spoke first, filling the silence with fragments of her life, books she loved, places she wished she had seen before they were paved over, questions that kept her awake at night. Edrin listened more than he spoke. He had forgotten what it felt like to hear someone talk without calculating what they wanted from him. You don't age, she said eventually. He stopped walking. I beg your pardon? She turned to face him, serious now. I've been watching you for weeks, always at dusk, always in the same places. Your face never changes. Edrin felt something tighten in his chest. That's a dangerous thing to say. I know, she replied. That's why I waited until today. Why today? She glanced at the sky, now bruised purple and gold. Because something feels unfinished. The word echoed inside him. He thought of the oracle, of the warning, of the sunset that refused to end. Leora, he said slowly, if I am what you think I am, you should be afraid. She stepped closer instead. If you are what I think you are, you've been afraid long enough. Silence settled between them, thick but not hostile. Edrin turned away, resuming his walk. You're mistaken, he said, but even mistakes have consequences. Don't follow me again. She watched him go, her expression unreadable. Behind him, the sky darkened at last, the final traces of light surrendering to night. Yet Edrin felt no relief. The hunger returned, stronger now, gnawing at the edges of his control. He ignored it, moving faster, deeper into the city's veins. By the time he reached his refuge, the memory had already begun. A different street, cobblestones slick with rain, torches burning low, a woman screaming his name. He pressed his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the cold floor. No, he whispered. But the past did not listen. He saw himself as he once was, desperate, terrified of dying, convinced that love could be sacrificed if survival demanded it. He remembered the choice he had made, the blood he had taken, the promise he had broken. The curse had not come from fangs or ritual. It had come from fear. Edrin covered his face with his hands. Outside, the city slept, unaware that something ancient had begun to unravel. And somewhere not far away, Leora stood at her window, watching the darkness, certain now that the strange. And somewhere not far away, Leora stood at her window, watching the darkness, certain now that the stranger she had met was carrying the weight of centuries. Chapter 3. Edrin did not feed that night. The hunger clawed at him until the early hours of morning, sharp and insistent, a reminder of the fragile balance he had maintained for centuries. Yet each time he moved toward the door, the memory of Leora's eyes stopped him. Not afraid, not pleading, simply certain. Certainty was dangerous. He remained seated on the floor as the night thinned and the city outside began its slow return to life. Dawn crept in like a secret, pale and cautious, slipping through cracks in the curtains. He stayed well away from it, though some irrational part of him wondered what it would feel like to let the light reach him again. That thought alone was enough to unsettle him. When the sun was safely high, Edrin retreated deeper into the building, into a room he rarely used. It held the few things he had never been able to discard, objects that survived moves across continents and centuries, a ring without a stone, a rusted key with no lock, a folded piece of parchment so worn it felt like cloth. He did not open the parchment. He already knew what it said. Sleep, when it came, was not the mercy it once had been. He dreamed of firelight and chanting voices, of his own hands shaking as they held a cup he had sworn never to drink from. He dreamed of the woman he loved, her face streaked with tears, as she begged him to stay mortal, to let time take them both naturally. "We will grow old together," she had said. "That is the bargain of love." He had been young enough then to believe love could be postponed. Edrin woke abruptly, breath unnecessary yet ragged, the echo of her voice lingering like smoke. He rose before the dream could settle back into him, pacing the narrow room. The city above was louder now, alive in ways that mocked his stillness. Against his better judgment, he found himself returning to the streets before dusk. He told himself it was vigilance, that after the oracle's warning, it was unwise to remain hidden. Yet he knew the truth, even as he moved through shadowed alleys and crowded avenues. He was looking for her. The sun began its descent, painting the buildings in gold and long shadows. Edrin kept to the covered walkways, watching reflections instead of the sky itself. Still, he felt it again, that strange pressure, as if the light were not merely touching the world, but searching it. Then he saw Leora. She was seated on the steps of a closed library, a book open on her lap, though her eyes were not on the page. She looked up before he was close enough to make a sound. "I wondered if you'd come back," she said. "I told you not to follow me." "I didn't," she replied. "I stayed where I always am." He stopped a few paces away. "That's worse." She closed the book gently. "You didn't feed." His jaw tightened. "You know nothing about that." "I know the signs," she said. "I've studied accounts, diaries, myths, written by people who didn't realize they were telling the truth. When immortals starve themselves, it's rarely about hunger." He studied her more carefully now. The way she spoke was not reckless. It was deliberate, as if she had spent years preparing for this conversation. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. "No," Leora replied quietly. "I think you are." The light shifted again. The sun lingered, stretching the moment thin. Edrin turned his face away. "You should stop watching the sky. It's not meant for people like me." "Maybe that's why it's misbehaving," she said. "Maybe it's tired of being avoided." Something in her words struck too close to truth. They walked together again, this time in silence. The city seemed to bend around them, noise dimming, footsteps falling into an uneasy rhythm. "Why now?" Edrin asked finally. "Of all the nights you could have spoken to me, why this one?" Leora slowed. "Because last night, after you left, I dreamed of a sunset I had never seen before. One that felt like a farewell." Edrin stopped. Dreams were not meant to cross like that, not between mortal and immortal. "That's impossible," he said. "So you keep telling yourself," she replied. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with temperature. In the distance, a church bell rang. Once, twice. The sound carried weight, as if marking something unseen. "I don't know what's happening," Edrin admitted, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "But I know this. Whatever is coming is older than either of us. Leora met his gaze. Then don't face it alone. For centuries, Edrin had survived by refusing that very thing. Above them, the sun hovered just above the horizon, unhurried, watching. And for the first time since the night he chose eternity over love, Edrin felt the future pulling at him instead of the past. Chapter 4. The sun finally sank, slow and deliberate, as if it had accomplished something unseen. Night settled over the city, but it did not bring Edrin the relief it once had. The darkness felt thinner now, stretched, as though it no longer fully belonged to him. He parted from Leora without ceremony. "Go home," he said, not unkindly this time. "I am home," she replied, gesturing to the streets, the buildings, the lives continuing around them. "But I will go." She did not ask where he was going. She did not ask when she would see him again. That restraint unsettled him more than desperation ever could. Edrin watched her disappear into the crowd before he allowed himself to move. When he did, he traveled fast, slipping through shadows, rooftops, forgotten passages beneath the city. He needed distance, silence, something ancient enough to absorb the weight pressing against his thoughts. He found it in a place long abandoned, a church sealed off after a fire decades earlier. Its roof had collapsed, leaving the nave open to the sky. Moonlight poured in, pale and indifferent. Edrin stood at the center, where the altar had once been. This was where it had begun. Not this church, but one like it. Stone walls, flickering candles, a promise whispered too late. The memory surged without warning. He was human again in it, breath coming fast, heart hammering with terror and hope. The sickness had been eating him alive. He remembered the ache in his bones, the way every sunrise felt like an insult. He remembered the fear of leaving her alone. "I don't want to die," he had told the man who offered him eternity. The man had smiled, kind and terrible. "Then don't." Edrin staggered back in the present, fingers digging into cracked stone. He had told himself the choice was necessary, that love would survive if he lived long enough to protect it. He had been wrong. The transformation had been agony and ecstasy intertwined, hunger tearing through him until it erased everything else. When he returned to her, when he begged her to run with him, to abandon time and consequence, she had seen what he was. "This isn't life," she had whispered. "It's hiding." She had chosen mortality. He had chosen fear. The memory shattered, leaving him alone beneath the open sky. Edrin sank to his knees, though his body did not require rest. Something inside him did. The silence pressed in, broken only by distant traffic and the rustle of wind through broken beams. "You came back." Her voice did not startle him this time. Leora stood at the edge of the ruined nave, coat pulled tight around her, eyes reflecting moonlight. She did not cross the threshold. "This place called to you," she continued softly. "Didn't it?" "You shouldn't be here," Edrin said, but there was no force behind it. "Neither should memories," she replied. "Yet they always find us." He turned to face her fully. "Do you know what I am?" "Yes." The word hung between them. "And you're still standing there," he said. "I study ruins," Leora answered. "I've learned they only collapse when something essential is removed." A bitter smile touched his lips. "You think I'm essential." "I think you were," she said. "And maybe you still are." Edrin rose slowly. "You don't understand the cost." "Then tell me." He almost refused. Confession was dangerous, but the words pressed against him, heavy with centuries of silence. "I chose this," he said. "Not heroism, not sacrifice, fear. I let love die because I couldn't bear to follow it." Leora listened without interruption. "I thought eternity would dull the pain," he continued. "Instead, it preserved it." She stepped closer now, careful, deliberate. "Then maybe the sunset isn't coming to punish you." His eyes darkened. What if it's coming to collect? Or to release, she said. The wind shifted. Clouds drifted across the moon, dimming the light. For a moment, the church felt suspended between states, not sanctuary, not ruin. Edrin felt it again, that strange sensation in his chest. Not hunger, not fear, but something fragile. Hope. I don't know how to let go, he said quietly. Leora met his gaze. Then we learn. Far above them, unseen by mortal eyes, the night deepened. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun waited, patient as memory, certain it would be seen again. Chapter 5. Edrin did not remember the last time he had allowed someone to remain beside him after a confession. Silence usually followed, distance, sometimes violence. But Leora stayed, standing in the ruined church, as though the broken stones and open sky were not warnings, but invitations. They sat among the rubble, not touching, not speaking at first. The city hummed beyond the shattered walls, a reminder that the world continued regardless of what ancient truths were unearthed in forgotten places. You never told me your name, Leora said at last. He hesitated. Names had weight. They anchored identity, made memory sharper. Over the centuries, he had shed them easily, letting Eris rename him or forget him entirely. Edrin, he said. The sound felt unfamiliar in his mouth. I was called that once. Leora nodded, as if receiving something sacred. Then I'll use it carefully. He almost laughed. They left the church before dawn, not together, but not apart either. Leora returned to her apartment, while Edrin retreated to the deeper shadows beneath the city. Yet the distance between them felt different now, charged with something unfinished. Sleep evaded him again. Instead, Edrin listened to the city's heartbeat, the pulse of human life above him. It sounded louder than it used to, sharper, as though his senses were adjusting to something he had long denied. When dusk approached once more, he felt it before he saw it. The pull. Not hunger. Not fear. Expectation. He emerged early this time, lingering beneath awnings and overhangs, watching the light descend. The sun slowed again, hesitating like a guest, unsure whether it was welcome. People noticed now. Phones lifted. Conversations paused. Someone laughed nervously and called it a trick of the atmosphere. Another muttered about climate anomalies. No one said what they were truly thinking. This isn't normal. Edrin stood among them, unseen in plain sight, and felt the weight of centuries shift. He found Leora on a bridge overlooking the river, the sky mirrored in rippling gold and red beneath her. She did not turn when he approached. I was hoping you'd come, she said. You knew I would. She smiled faintly. I hoped. They leaned against the railing, side by side, watching the light stretch thin. The water reflected the sunset in fragments, never holding it whole. I've been researching all day, Leora said. Old texts, fragmented legends, accounts dismissed as metaphor. And? Edrin asked. And they all say the same thing, she replied. Immortality doesn't end when the body fails. It ends when the reason for enduring does. He closed his eyes. The words resonated too deeply to be coincidence. There's more, she continued. Some myths speak of a final threshold, not death, release. A moment where the immortal must choose whether to remain a witness or become part of what they've been observing. Edrin opened his eyes and looked at her. And what happens if they choose wrong? Leora met his gaze steadily. They keep surviving. The cruelty of that answer settled heavily between them. Across the bridge, the sky darkened at its edges, but refused to fall completely into night. Streetlights flickered uncertainly, as if unsure whether they were needed yet. I don't know how to stop, Edrin said. Survival has been my instinct for too long. Leora placed her hands on the railing, knuckles pale. Then maybe this isn't about stopping. Maybe it's about standing still. A sudden pain flared in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He staggered slightly, gripping the stone. "Edrin?" she asked, alarmed. He shook his head. "I've felt wounds, fire, steel, magic. This is different." The pain faded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind an echo, like a door opening somewhere inside him. The river below rippled strangely, its surface trembling despite the lack of wind. Something was waking. High above them, the sun hovered, its light thinner now, almost translucent, as though it were no longer fully part of the world. Edrin felt a certainty settle into his bones. This was no longer a warning, it was a countdown. And whatever the night still owed him, it was running out of time. Chapter 6. The shape of an ending. By the sixth evening, the city had begun to whisper. Edrin heard it in passing conversations, in the way people slowed their steps at dusk, in the restless energy that crept into the streets when the sun began to descend. News outlets spoke of atmospheric anomalies. Scientists debated light refraction and particulate matter. Social feeds filled with images of sunsets that seemed too vivid, too slow, too deliberate. No one spoke of curses. No one spoke of choices. But Edrin felt both pressing closer. He stood beneath the overhang of an old theater, its marquee long dark, letters missing from its name. He had once watched a play here in another century, sitting among mortals who believed stories ended cleanly, with applause. They rarely did. The pain returned without warning. This time it did not stab. It spread, warm and heavy, like grief settling into bone. Edrin pressed a hand to his chest, steadying himself. His body had been a constant for so long, unchanged, obedient. Now it felt like a landscape shifting beneath his feet. He breathed, though he did not need to. Across the street, Leora waited. She had not called, had not messaged. They had reached a quiet understanding that some moments could not be summoned, only answered. "You're fading," she said as he approached. "I don't feel like I'm dying," Edrin replied. "I feel like I'm remembering something I forgot on purpose." They walked together, away from the crowds, toward the river again. The sky was already stained with color, gold deepening into copper. The horizon stretched thin, like fragile glass. "I found something else," Leora said. "A pattern." He glanced at her. "In the texts?" "In the witnesses," she corrected. "The ones who lived near immortals during transitions. They describe a change before the end, a softening, a return of things long absent." "What things?" She hesitated. "Pain, joy, uncertainty." Edrin stopped walking. Those were not gifts. They were vulnerabilities. "I spent centuries perfecting the absence of those," he said quietly. "I know," Leora replied. "That's why their return matters." The sun slowed again, more noticeably now. People stopped outright, staring upward, unease rippling through the crowd. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked why the day wouldn't finish. Edrin watched the scene with unfamiliar intensity. Every sound felt sharper, every face clearer. The world was pressing itself into him, as if afraid it would be forgotten. "I can hear their hearts," he said softly. "All of them. I learned to tune that out long ago." Leora's voice trembled just slightly. "And now?" "And now it feels wrong to ignore it." They reached the river's edge. The water reflected the sky, almost perfectly, the line between above and below dissolving. "Edrin," Leora said, turning to him fully, "if this ends the way I think it might." "If," he echoed. "If," she insisted, "I need you to understand something. Whatever choice you make, it won't erase what you were. But it might finally explain it." Chapter 7. The night deepened, thick and suffocating, yet somehow lighter than Edrin had ever known. The air smelled of rain and rust and memory. He followed Leora through the winding streets, their steps falling quietly on wet asphalt, the city around them moving as if in a half-dream. "You've carried centuries in silence," Leora said, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. "I can feel it. The weight of all the choices you never made." Edrin said nothing. Words had long since become dangerous. Confession was a blade that could cut, even when it was meant to heal. He had learned this early. The fewer people knew, the fewer mistakes remained. "And what about the ones you did make?" she pressed. "Do they haunt you?" He stopped walking, looking up at the sky, where the last traces of sunset clung stubbornly to the horizon. "They do more than haunt," he admitted. "They define me." Leora studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way shadows seemed to gather around him like loyal servants. "Then maybe it's time to let them go," she said softly. He laughed quietly, a sound that did not reach his eyes. "Do you know what it is to carry a life that refuses to end? To see every sun rise and fall while the world forgets you?" "I can imagine it," she said, "but imagining isn't the same as living it." Edrin pressed his palm against a cold brick wall. Memories surged unbidden. The first time he had tasted blood and known both pleasure and regret simultaneously. The face of the woman he had loved, long dead, whispering in terror for him to remain mortal. The faces of children he had known as friends who aged while he stayed the same, untouchable and untouching. All of it, every fragment, converged into a singular, oppressive weight. And yet, standing beside Leora, something strange occurred. Something alien to centuries of solitude. A possibility. "What do you want from me?" he asked, voice low, almost a growl. "Nothing," she said. "I just want you to see the choice you've been avoiding." He shook his head. "Choices are a human burden. I am beyond them." She reached out, brushing a finger against his arm. The contact was fleeting, almost fragile, but it left a ripple in him deeper than any hunger or pain he had known. "Maybe that's why it hurts so much," she said, "because you're still human in ways you refuse to acknowledge." For a long moment, he said nothing, allowing the night to press in around them. The streets were quieter now, the city holding its breath as if it sensed something monumental about to occur. "I've made mistakes," he finally whispered. "Mistakes I can't undo. People I can't save." "And yet," she countered, "you still have tonight. Maybe it's enough to begin." Edrin's eyes lifted to the horizon. The sun had disappeared, but its memory lingered in the bruised edges of clouds and the reflective gleam of puddles on the streets. The last traces of light seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, a heartbeat that had long since stopped, yet felt more alive than ever. "The world doesn't wait for us," he muttered. "No," Leora agreed, "but sometimes the world gives us a chance to catch up with ourselves." Edrin closed his eyes, feeling the centuries compress into a single breath, a single heartbeat, a single choice. For the first time in ages, he considered surrender, not to death, but to something deeper, something that might finally release the weight he had carried for so long. "Tell me," he said, opening his eyes to meet hers. "What happens if I choose wrong?" "Then you learn," she replied simply. The city sighed around them, unaware of the ancient reckoning unfolding in its streets. Shadows stretched long and thin, but this time they did not threaten. They waited. And for the first time, Edrin did not turn away from them. The night was heavy, the memories insistent, but beneath it all, something stirred. Hope. The first step toward the impossible had begun. Chapter 8. The night was quieter than usual, but it carried a tension that Edrin could feel in his bones. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching unnaturally, as if the city itself was aware that something monumental was about to happen. He walked slowly beside Leora, the river reflecting faint light, fractured and trembling like a warning. "I don't know if I've ever faced fear like this," he admitted. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the night. "Not from hunters, not from fire, not from death. But this uncertainty, it feels heavier than anything I've endured." Leora looked at him, unflinching. "It's because this isn't about survival," she said. "It's about choice. The hardest kind." Edrin's gaze drifted to the horizon. The sun, though long gone, had left a residue, a bleeding glow that lingered stubbornly in the clouds. It was beautiful and cruel at once. Something inside him tightened. He knew instinctively that this sunset was not just a phenomenon of light, but of time itself, bending to witness the final act of his long, endless life. He closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. The centuries of love, loss, and indifference, each decision etched like scars into his being. He thought of the children he had watched grow old and die, the cities that rose and crumbled, the faces of countless mortals who had faded from the world while he remained. "I've been running from this for so long," he murmured. "I've avoided endings, avoided consequences. I thought it was strength, but it was only fear." "And fear has carried you far," Leora replied softly, "but it can't carry you anymore." They paused on a small bridge, the river below reflecting the fractured glow of the lingering sunset. The water seemed almost alive, moving with a rhythm that echoed the pulse of time itself. "What do you want from me?" he asked again, the words heavier than before. "Nothing," she said simply. "I want you to see yourself clearly, for the first time in centuries." Edrin's gaze fell to the water. He saw fragments of his life mirrored there, faces, cities, moments of both cruelty and tenderness, all floating like shards of glass beneath the surface. Each reflection demanded acknowledgement. Each reminded him that eternity had always been a weight, not a gift. "And if I fail?" he asked, voice trembling for the first time. "Then you live with it," she said, "but you won't be running anymore. That alone is freedom." The wind stirred, brushing cold against his skin. Edrin felt the familiar pang of hunger, but it was overshadowed by something deeper: anticipation. This was no ordinary night. This was the threshold he had been avoiding, the moment that all his centuries of survival had led him to. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill him. For the first time, he felt the weight of the years he had carried begin to lift slightly, not because the past was gone, but because he was willing to face it. Leora reached out, her hand brushing his. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the power to anchor him to the present. He did not flinch. He did not turn away. Above them, the horizon shimmered with the final colors of the sun, a reminder that endings, like beginnings, are rarely sudden. They arrive slowly, demanding attention, reflection, and courage. Edrin understood then that this was not just a sunset. It was a question, a challenge, an opportunity. And for the first time in centuries, he felt ready to answer. The night waited with him, patient, as though it had been waiting his entire life. The edge of the horizon was near, and beyond it lay a choice he could no longer evade. Chapter 9. The horizon burned one final time, not with fury, not with judgment, but with quiet inevitability. Gold, crimson, and violet bled together, as though the sky itself remembered every century Edrin had lived, and every choice he had made. He stood at the river's edge, Leora beside him, feeling the pull of something greater than hunger, greater than fear, greater than even immortality itself. The light did not burn, it did not threaten, it simply was. And for the first time, he did not feel compelled to flee. "I'm not sure what comes next," he whispered, voice low enough that even the wind might not carry it. "Maybe that's the point," Leora replied. Her eyes reflected the last shimmer of sun. "The future doesn't belong to anyone until they step into it." Edrin exhaled, long and slow, feeling centuries of weight ease from him. Memories came, but they were no longer chains. Faces, cities, loves, mistakes. They were fragments of a life fully lived. He had survived, yes, but now he could choose. The sun's edge touched the river. The world seemed to hold its breath. He took Leora's hand. It was a simple gesture, human in its imperfection, but grounding him more than any shadow or stone ever had. "I've spent too long running," he said softly. "Tonight, I stop." The light faded fully. Night embraced them. And for the first time, Edrin felt neither fear nor hunger. Only peace. He looked at her. "Thank you for being here." "Always," she said. And there it was. An ending that did not feel like a death, but a beginning. Eternity had offered him countless sunsets, but this was the last one he would ever see. And he saw it fully, without fear, without regret, without illusion. The legend of the vampire did not end in violence, nor in ashes. It ended in quiet choice, in the courage to let go, in the courage to live. The city slept around them, unaware that history had shifted in these small, intimate moments. The night waited, patient, holding its stories, and Edrin finally stepped into it, free. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know what part of Edrin's journey moved you the most. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.